Today's guest is Jason Oberlander, a really extraordinary executive in the world of sport media entertainment, having started his career in the Viacom organization, first at Showtime Networks, then CBS Radio, and then on to MTV Networks in brand solutions. And at that point, we're going to hear about this, I think a little bit of a light bulb went off for Jason, and he migrated over to the NBA. And this was under David Stern's leadership, arguably one of the best, if not the best ever commissioners in any sports league, certainly in the United States. And from the NBA, he went to IMG, again, another stalwart organization in the college division. And while he was there, IMG College merged with then Learfield College. It became Learfield IMG. He migrated over as the senior vice president for revenue generation and national sales at Learfield IMG College, before he found his way via a recruiter to ASM Global, where I had the great pleasure of working side by side with Jason for the better part of 4 years. He was the chief commercial officer. So, Jason, friend, colleague, extraordinary leader, can't thank you enough for joining us today on the Best Boss Ever podcast.
Thanks, Carl. I've been eagerly awaiting my invitation to join, so here we are.
Well, here we are, and it's great to have you. Listen, from your MBA at Columbia to the chief commercial officer at ASM Global, you've had, we just ticked them off, a large number of great stops along the way, and I'm sure you've had many great bosses. So let's hear straight from you on who the one or two, or more than that, great bosses you've had, why, and what you learned from them.
I've been really fortunate in my career to have some really powerful mentors, leaders, coaches, bosses, whatever moniker you want to give them. But they were a number that were really pivotal for me in terms of my career growth, in terms of my personal growth. I think back first to Jim O'Connell, who I worked with closely at CBS, and it was just as I was trying to crack the code on sales, and he was, my first sales manager. And I think the thing that struck me with him was just how measured and calm he was. There was nothing that got him rattled, and he always used to say, don't get too high on the highs or too low on the lows. And it was such a calming presence, in a tough, kind of stressful, sales environment. And the other thing I remember about Jim is, he always, whenever you walked into his office, started with asking about you, and he put the focus on you. He wanted to know what's going on, in your personal life and what's going on with the job and how you're doing. And he always had that check-in, and that was priority number one. That was the first item on the agenda. And that always struck me, as a way to build, trust in a relationship, with those who work for you. And I certainly took that to heart. I think after Jim, the next one that comes to mind is when I went up from CBS to Viacom Corporate, worked for Lisa McCarthy, who, at first was this larger than life, big personality, a little bit intimidating, but very quickly it was clear that she was committed to her people and committed to not just their professional growth, but their personal growth. Really developed a hunger for coaching and training via her, because she pushed me into that, and I was a willing participant in it, but definitely she opened the door for that and encouraged it, and that made a big difference for me. The other thing she did, which no one had really done previously, is promote me without me campaigning for it or asking for it or pushing for it. She kind of put me in a position which I think was a little beyond my experience level, and it forced me to, in a positive way, step up and grow up and mature and grow into the position. And it was something that really stuck with me, particularly as I was building and managing and leading teams and developing people, about the power of that belief in someone and what it can do to really draw out the best in you. The next boss that comes to mind is someone you know very well, someone we both worked with at ASM, and I was very excited to be a part of the team that helped recruit him and bring him on board as president of business development at ASM, but I worked with Gary Jacobus at the NBA for about 18 months, 2 years, and the NBA was, as you mentioned, during the David Stern era. It was a rigorous, tough environment. It was a boot camp, kind of like getting a second and third MBA. I really value that experience, but one thing that Gary brought to all that rigor and seriousness is a sense of humor, and he was able to diffuse tense situations, whether it was, a partner-facing discussion or, a sales-related issue or management issue, and he could really diffuse a situation with just a well-timed comment or quip that was just tinged with humor. And people would be smiling. It would break the tension, and you could solve the problem that much more readily, and it was more fun, frankly. It injected some joy into the day. I think because of that experience with him, we became lifelong friends and colleagues again. And I really value that. All of these people, by the way, that I'm speaking about, I remain connected to. They all are part of a what I'd call a personal board of directors.
Right.
I make a big decision. I reach out to these people and ask for their advice, and they know me. They know my strengths and my shortfalls, my gaps. They know what motivates me and how I approach things, and can help me kind of navigate some of the more challenging decisions, whether it's a career change or a job opportunity or some other challenge. I think also about Andrew Judelson, who I probably spent the longest period of time with, almost 10 years at IMG College and later Learfield, and through all that transition. And Judd, he's someone who I really learned a lot from in that time period. One of the things I picked up on was his relentless, drive for accountability, personal accountability. Setting out what you want to do and then doing it and being accountable for what it takes to do it. Whether that's, a team goal or a personal goal or, a project that we're working on, doing it. And he was rigorous about holding his team to account, but more by example, holding himself to account.
Right.
And leading by example.
So key, right? Lead by example. Such a requirement for effective leadership.
No doubt. Classic, don't do what I say, do what I do.
Somehow parenting is the exact opposite of that. Don't do what I do what I say. I mean, that's another story altogether. Listen, so Lisa got you over your skis. I can say that because you and I are both mountain aficionados and love to get on the ski hill and get some turns in. And Andrew, taught you by example and required the accountability aspect of a daily professional executive's life. Gary brought sort of the X factor to the table, right? I mean, injecting humor into a situation that needs it or where humor might be required to diffuse a tense situation or moment is as important as knowing the guy or the woman who has a sense of humor, and you walk by them in the hallway and there's a quip or there's some, zinger that floats across the hallway and you just crack up. I mean, it's that cultural element to me, having been in many different cultures, is an absolute requirement now. And I think we had it. We had it at with Gary, and to a certain degree Ron, because he has a wicked sense of humor if you crack the code at the right time with the right moment, right?
He's whip sharp. I don't want to forget Ron. Someone you and I both worked for. Ron, I think he taught me a lot about team building. I think what he did in such a short period of time at ASM, as we were growing the business and getting ready for the sale of the company, was assemble a really strong group of leaders who were experts in their various respective disciplines. And he did it in such a way that there was no politicking. Everyone was on a mission. Everyone worked together. If there was politicking, that individual would hear about it, and it wasn't going to it wasn't going to play.
Right. He just didn't tolerate it.
Didn't tolerate it. Zero tolerance for that. It was all about doing the right thing, being on the mission, and they were all good people, and we liked working together. And having that filter in recruiting and being able to make the call. He's not an expert in partnerships or necessarily business development, but he's a leader who can identify people who are and develop their confidence and trust, and bring them in and then get them all working together on the same team. It's 101, and it's simple, but it's not easy.
Correct. And he said a super interesting thing, because he was my first guest on this podcast adventure I'm on. And thank you again for joining. One of the things he said was, in the recruitment of executives, leaders in an organization, he said at the top, he said, if you bat 500, that's a win. And I thought to myself, dude, I've watched you for 25 years. You've never batted below 750. I don't know where you get the 500 mark from. And I think you and I, Gary, others, are living proof that he is really good at identifying not just talent, but talent that A, he knows can do the job, but B, fits the cultural mix that he is seeking to grow and expand, right? I mean, the ASM environment was a beast. I mean, you know it better than anyone. And the way he led that group, bringing people in, you, others, getting the company ready for a sale, which was his mission from the get-go. I mean, that's why they hired him, to get this company right-sized and growing in growth mode, because the partners that were in it were ready to exit.
Yeah, I think doing all of that, and again, doing it with a sense of humor, it goes a long way.
It does. It absolutely does. Well, those are great examples of very solid leadership skills, and I can, having worked with you and for you, let everybody in the audience know that all those line items that you ticked off, you not only learned, but you took with you and now deploy them in your own leadership and management style. So thank you for that. So at a certain point in your career, you were in brand marketing, management, which is good, but it's, in your own words, it's really not where the money is. We all know that making rain, generating sales, being effective at business development, expanding markets, expanding within market segments, all of that is really important for growth, because growth is simply about top line growth, strategically, logically, and, again, Iranism, fish where the fish are. So was there a moment in your career where you just woke up and said, hey, I'm going to think I need to go down another path?
Yeah, I wanted to break into the world of sport, media, entertainment when I first came out of university. And I was fortunate to land an assistant job at Showtime in sports and event programming on the PR team. And that was a blast. I mean, it was a world of boxing, Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield era, all the chaos of that environment, the promoters, the fight camps, the personalities, Don King, it was exciting. And to be in the eye of a media storm and traveling the world with that circus was fascinating, and it was great growth and experience. But I think I quickly realized that PR was probably not going to be my path. And if I wanted to grow and develop, I needed to broaden my areas of focus. And I looked around at the company, and the CEO of Showtime, Matt Blank, he had an MBA. The head of our group, Mark Greenberg, had an MBA. And I thought, that probably makes sense at this point in my career. If I want to make this pivot and figure out how I want to chart a new course to be a leader in the world of sport and entertainment and media, it's probably a good idea to go get my MBA. And I spent, a good 2 years working on that project of figuring out where I wanted to go to school and figuring out how to get in. And finally, after 2 years, getting accepted at Columbia. And then, doing that boot camp and investing full time for 2 years in learning the fundamentals of business and broadening my network and frankly, being exposed to some very smart people who had knowledge and skills that, I need to catch up to in the realm of finance and accounting and more quantitative pursuits. But I also learned a lot, from professors in some of the soft skills. And I think a lot of those soft skill classes are becoming more and more relevant the further I get away from them. Leadership or organizational design. But when I came out of business school, I could have gone down a number of paths, whether it was strategy or business development. And I knew I wanted to be back in the world of sports and entertainment and media. And if I was going to do that, I figured I should really focus on, the revenue side of the business and figure out how I can chart a course, in sales and sales management and eventually leadership.
Right. So the penchant for sport. On a personal note here, I happen to know the story of your grandfather and what he did in sport in Canada and for McAvoy in Canada, the Jewish sporting movement. So share a little bit with the audience about that story, and then we'll get into some more on the data side.
Yeah, my grandfather, Fred Oberlander, he was born in Vienna in Austria, and he tried to get into water polo sport.
Good try. I would have advocated for that.
Near and dear to you. And his coach, I think quickly recognized that it was not the right sport for him and encouraged him to go into wrestling, which was clearly the right sport for him because he was ultimately a world champion and an Olympian. He ended up emigrating in the war to the UK and represented the United Kingdom in the Olympics. He was captain of that wrestling team.
Wow.
Eventually immigrated to Canada. He was Canadian champion. He helped start the Maccabiah movement and Maccabiah Canada. So he was always, invested in sport, not just as an athlete, but as a leader in the development of sport.
Well, yeah, the apple didn't fall far from the tree before that. So those stories are so important because it influences and actually helps you have a much greater understanding about where your desires are and sort of not just where your roots are, but the story of your grandfather, not just his athletic career, but his leadership within the sporting movement. I dare say, and I'll go out on a limb here, that might be the reason why you gravitated to sports so quickly coming out of university.
Yeah, if you'd asked me this question 20 years ago, I don't think I would have put my finger on it. But, now I look back and clearly there was an influence there. It wasn't a direct influence. It was one where by osmosis, I was just drawn to it.
Right. Well, hey, that stuff works, right? So let's get more granular here. You've had a tremendous career in sport, in sponsorship, and with the MBA chops that you have. The data story over the last, I'm going to say, call it 15 years, certainly around brand metrics, how brand marketers determine how efficient or effective marketing dollars are in what niches. The flip side of that coin is the seller mentality. You and I come from a selling perspective, and the targets are brands, and we want to unlock sponsorship dollars. But at the same time, understand what those brand KPIs are. It's a solutions-oriented approach where it's, learn as much as one can about the brand metrics, their goals, their objectives, their near-term, mid-term, long-term KPIs and goals, and then build to suit, right? So how important now do you believe the the whole data story around sponsorship is?
I think data is very important and increasingly more important. If you're a CMO of a brand, you have to justify your investments to your CFO, your CEO. You have to show that they're performing, or you're gonna lose that budget, or worse, lose your job.
Right.
Happens. I think one of the challenges, and I don't think it's ever been solved to satisfaction at scale, is this conflict of interest, where to get the best story, a property and a brand really need to share their data to understand how every consumer engagement, fan engagement is impacting things. But the challenge there is, I think brands may be reticent to share the real data related to sales and where those sales originate from, or how things move down the funnel. Because if a property understands that and understands the value that they're bringing forward to the brand, it makes it more difficult for the brand to negotiate effectively.
Right.
In a renewal. Accordingly, there's this almost disincentive to share information and data, which I think is ultimately a disservice to both property and brand, because if they can figure out how to knit that story together with a complete data set and really identify how programs can move the needle, you can be more effective in that partnership. But I think that tension is hard to surmount, and I think brands, rightfully so, are protective of their data.
Well, they are, for sure, some more than others, but you used a very key word right there in that last sentence, partnership. If you can sort of, get on the same side of the desk as opposed to across the desk from each other or across the table from each other, and recognize that what you're really embarking on here is a partnership. And the more information, the more data sharing, the more alignment there is on brand property against common goals and KPIs, the better the partnership is. And to your point, a more effective renewal process ensues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The best partnerships are going to be one where there's a level of trust and a level of data flow between. But I do think those, are not commonplace. You have to work at them and invest in them and develop them over time.
Right. And at the end of the day, it's a people business, right? If there's a revolving door, new people all the time, the trust goes back down to zero, and you got to rebuild it all over again. The best partnerships are one where a group on each side, whether there's turnover or not, is aligned on objectives and KPIs, and that trust level has been built, and it really makes for a much more effective partnerships. I solely agree with you on the protective mindset around data. To what extent do you think this nascent but rapidly emerging AI part of the data story is going to either enhance and improve those kinds of relationships, or be cause for more disruption or more concern?
Generally speaking, I think we're at an amazing moment in time. I think the tools that have been developed, have been released, and are only going to improve very rapidly related to AI to accomplish all manner of work, I think is amazing. It's a really exciting moment. And I don't know that no one is an expert in this field. And it's moving too quickly to, claim expertise, beyond a moment in time. What I do know, is that, if you want to be successful going forward and you want to figure out how to maximize your own leverage and work product, you're going to have to develop a deep understanding of how these tools work. And for me personally, I consider myself a neophyte. I'm going to go back to school to do just that. So I'm enrolled in a course with UCLA Extension. It's an introductory survey course just to get a broad-based understanding of how these tools work and how they can be leveraged. And I expect that is going to pique my curiosity and inspire me to go deeper into it.
Yeah, well, it is, and you're really smart to do that, because there's one thing certain. It's not going, this genie is not going back in the bottle. It is going to be explosive over the coming years, and those that embrace it and lean in will be the better for it. And I applaud your first step. And I suppose, given that the writer in you, you have done some experimenting around with the Chat GPTs or the Claudes of the world.
No, it's fun to test it and see what it's capable of, and it's almost limitless in terms of where you can leverage it to answer questions or guide you or frankly create work.
Right. Well, yeah, lots more to come on that topic and subject. And I suspect that, the more we learn and the more we lean in, obviously, the better we're going to get at it. Everybody in our sector, in our niche, marketers, buyers, sellers, everybody's at the same place doing the same thing, which is experimenting and getting, their feet wet. And to stay on the sidelines right now, you do so at your peril. So wade into the deep end of the pool really fast on AI, and I know that's exactly what you're doing.
I think that is true of individuals. I also think it's even more so true of organizations.
Right. Right. I'm going to sort of leave that now and shift gears a little bit to a more current event scenario. We talked a little bit, and you referenced your decision to go to Columbia University, get your MBA. Columbia has been in the news a lot over the last 12 to 18 months, not necessarily in a good way based on your perspective and point of view. So my question to you, Jason, as a family man of the Jewish faith, I'd love, and I really think it's important for our audience to hear your perspective on the sort of collective unrest. We can start with Columbia on college campuses around the country that have been sort of the order of the day over the last 12 to 18 months. And then it's all surrounding the October 7th event in Gaza and, the ensuing, let's just say, litany of current events, good, bad, ugly.
Well, first, I appreciate you asking the question, and, I'll just give a little context. Yeah, I think you know this, but my grandmother is a Holocaust survivor, still alive today, living in Montreal, Canada. My wife was born in Israel. I identify with Judaism, and it goes beyond faith. In fact, it's probably more so a cultural identification than it is a religious one for me personally. And what I'd say is every member of the Jewish community that I know thinks about the hostages every day and thinks about this conflict every day. We also feel and are acutely aware of rising anti-Semitism that really skyrocketed on October 8th. Before Israel even had a chance to react, there was this palpable sense that, while there was a measure of empathy and sympathy from the global community, there was far louder voices who were immediately being critical of Israel and then by extension voicing that anger to Jews across the diaspora. And so that anti-Semitism and the growing anti-Semitism globally is felt by every member of the Jewish community. I think what is also felt is disquieting silence from friends, allies, colleagues, people who frankly were very vocal around other topics over the past few years, and rightfully so, following, for example, the George Floyd riots. People who were very vocal on their social spheres just went silent. And so you asking the question is something that I feel is rarely asked and rarely discussed, and I appreciate you doing that. You brought it up in the context of Columbia, which was a school for which I had a lot of pride in having attended, and to see how the student population who have embraced, frankly, violent rhetoric and in some degree violence to personal property and persons and intimidation and support of terrorist causes. The dithering by the administration on how to deal with it is really disheartening. And I follow it very closely. There was an incident in taking over one of the buildings for college just yesterday. It's alarming that this can happen on the grounds of some of what should be the most open, critically minded institutions in America. You know, you have protesters who, frankly, are promoting misinformation, lies, and chanting slogans, taking over buildings, silencing people. There's no debate. There's no discussion. There's no dialogue. It's a lot of chanting and sloganeering, and some of that chanting and sloganeering is frankly violent.
Yes. Well, your willingness to not just graciously accept the question, but to answer it in the way that you have is really extraordinary. It is a tough subject. And to your point, the silence almost speaks louder than whatever action might be going on, particularly with what I would call the dark anti-Semitic cloud that you referenced that sort of, mushroomed on the 8th of October. Not that it wasn't already there. It was sort of already there smoldering, right? We've all experienced it. And, as a man of Christian faith, having raised my family that way, I know many, many Jews. And every single one of them that I know is a tremendous human being, president, company included. The reason I wanted to ask the question, J.O., is because you've lived it. Your family has lived it in a very real, practical way. And it's pretty easy for those of us that, in my case, have never been to Israel. I've just watched it from afar. But your willingness to address and tackle the topic is not only heartfelt, but hugely appreciated by me.
Thank you. Put a documentary together, a testimony of my grandmother's experience. And I made a point to not be silent on this topic after learning her story and understanding how these things happen because there is evil in the world and there are perpetrators of evil, but it also happens because good people are silent. There's a saying, I can't remember the historian, who talks about how the road to Auschwitz is paved with indifference. And so I made it a point not to be quiet about it, to talk about it openly, to put her story out there, because I think the story and her words speak for itself. There's an instinct often as a member of the Jewish community to hide from it, to not be loud and vocal, not poke the bear. A friend of, I've had some friends who have taken the opposite path and, who have said to me, the antidote for anti-Semitism is Jewish pride. And that resonated with me.
Well, listen, we do, I'm pleased to hear that you did a documentary on your grandmother. We do a newsletter that will feature you, your story, your episode after the preliminary publishing date, and we will absolutely, your permission required, include a link in that newsletter so that anyone and everyone that gets it can hit that link and see and learn from the documentary that you put together on your grandmother.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, no, consider it done. Well, listen, pivoting off a subject like that to the end of the podcast episode where we talk about, the 3 common questions I ask every guest, it's that time. So in light of everything we've discussed earlier on, this is the first question is around your favorite mistake. That's where you messed up big time in your career, recovered from it, or lived to fight another day, let's just say. What you learned from it and what was it?
Yeah, one comes to mind. It's probably not the biggest mistake, but it's the one that comes to mind. And I remember back early on in my career working at Showtime Networks, and we used to play a game where we'd write the press release for the fight before the fight. And I remember accidentally publishing a version to the media that was clearly not accurate. It made me, first of all, it was a very embarrassing moment, a lot of egg on your face. It made me realize a few things. One is, double check what you're sending and to whom you're sending it, because you can't take it back. But more importantly, when you stumble and you make a mistake and you have a moment of embarrassment, it's just a moment in time and things will pass. And you're not ultimately defined by your mistakes. And I've made many in my career. You're defined by your character and how you approach people and your work and the values you hold. And you're going to make mistakes. And the people on your team are going to make mistakes. And helping to put some perspective, maybe inject a little humor into those moments, I think is important.
It is. And we've all made a version of that mistake. You reply all when you really only meant to reply. And you can't undo it, right? It's out there, it's native, it's gone wild, and you got to live with whatever consequence comes down the pike. So that's a good one. The second question is a fun one. So we both spent a lot of time in the sport and entertainment industry. So this is your favorite live concert that featured a female artist or a female-led band?
Yeah, I have a lot of favorite female vocalists. Stevie Nicks comes to mind. I saw her recently at the Hollywood Bowl. She was so impressive. I mean, her voice was still there, so powerful. Would love to see her, reunited with Fleetwood Mac and hear some of that again, but her voice just haunts me.
It was always haunting, and she was always amazing. And her now deceased female partner at Fleetwood Mac, Christine McVie, the two of them together were extraordinary. But, Stevie's sort of raw, hauntingly melodic but beautiful voice is one everybody should hear, actually, live. I've had the pleasure several times back in the day. But that's a great call. Last one, you, a reader and a writer. You and I have shared lots of commentary over the years about what we love to read and why. But your favorite word and why, because it's so important as a leader, what you say, and as importantly, what you don't say. So your word.
One word?
One word.
Integrity.
Can't say I'm surprised at that. Love that. Well, listen, we don't need to explain what integrity is. One either has it or one doesn't, and it's 100% tied to character, and you used that word a little bit ago. So I'll mush them together and say the character and the integrity of Jason Oberlander is extraordinary. I've blessed to have been able to work with you for a number of years, and further blessed that you've spent the time to be our guest on the Best Boss Ever podcast.
Thank you, Carl. Finally, I got to be a guest on the show.
You knew it was coming. It was just a matter of when. All right.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.